Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 607, and I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. We've got a lot of news to talk about on today's show, so be sure that you share the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. And of course, it's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. And the best way to follow all my work is by following me on Twitter at KyleAnzalone_. I post this show, all the articles I write, and anything else I think is important. All right, let's get into it. First story up here today is huge. Russia warns U.S. close to making fatal miscalculation over Ukraine. So on Monday, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov warned the U.S. to listen to warnings from Russian President Vladimir Putin about allowing Ukraine to strike Russian territory with American-made weapons. Ryabkov said, according to TASS, "I would like to caution American officials against miscalculations which may have fatal consequences. For some unknown reason, they underestimate the seriousness of the rebuff they may receive. I am urging these officials who are seemingly not bothered by anything to take some time away from playing computer games, which is apparently all they are doing, given their lighthearted approach to serious issues, and take a closer look at what Putin said, particularly at press conferences following talks in Takhnet," referring to a warning Putin issued when he was in Uzbekistan. So Putin said there would be serious consequences for any NATO country that allows Ukraine to hit Russian territory with its weapons. Putin said, "This constant escalation can lead to serious consequences. If there is serious consequences occur in Europe, how will the U.S. behave? Bearing in mind our parity in the field of strategic weapons, hard to say. Do they want global conflict?" So Ryabkov called Putin's comments a very significant warning, and it should be treated with the utmost seriousness. Russia also previously warned the UK that it would strike British military sites in Ukraine and, quote, beyond, if British weapons are used on Russian territory. US and other Western officials have shrugged off the warnings despite the major risk of escalations. So this is NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. He said on Friday, "This is nothing new. It has been the case for a long time that every time NATO allies are providing support to Ukraine, President Putin is trying to threaten us not to do that." Despite Stoltenberg's comments, the risk of Russian retaliation is very high, since Putin has a history of escalating the war in Ukraine in a direct response to attacks on Russian territory. For example, he did not begin major strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure until after the first bombing of the Crimean Bridge in October of 2022. Putin has also said that Russia's new offensive in Kharkiv is a response to Ukrainian attacks on Russia's Belgorod Oblast, which borders Kharkiv. He said the purpose of the offensive was to create a buffer zone to prevent attacks on Belgorod. All right, so next up here, this is interesting. Biden to skip Switzerland-Ukraine war summit despite Zelensky's invitation, and it looks like Vice President Kamala Harris is going in his stead. So this is funny. Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com. President Biden will skip a summit on the Ukraine war that will be held in Switzerland despite Ukrainian President Zelensky urging him to attend. The summit will be held on June 15th and is being billed as a peace summit, but Russia has not been invited to attend. At previous summits, Zelensky has pushed his demand for peace talks, which include a complete Russian withdrawal from Ukraine and Ukrainian control of Crimea, which are non-starters for Moscow. Instead of going to the summit, Biden will attend a fundraising event in California and is sending Vice President Kamala Harris in this place. The Vice President will reaffirm support for the people of Ukraine as they defend themselves against ongoing Russian aggression, a spokesperson for Harris said. I find this interesting. Again, anything that happens in the Biden administration, you always have to wonder, if Trump was president, what would be the reaction here? So imagine President Trump skips a Ukrainian peace conference that is hosted by Ukraine. You know, this is a big establishment event, and decides to hold a fundraising event instead. I think there would be a lot of people very upset with the president for not taking these negotiations seriously enough. Now, we know that these negotiations aren't serious, and you do have to wonder if this is meant to be some kind of slap in the face to Zelensky or message to Zelensky from the US that, hey, if you're going to be cartoonish about your demands during these peace talks, then we're not going to be serious about them either. Look how unserious we are. We're sending Kamala Harris. At the same time, the U.S. and its close allies have discouraged negotiations with Russia throughout the war, and this has kind of been their parallel track of pretending that there's some kind of diplomatic path to the end of this war anyways. And so this whole thing is very interesting. I guess Biden is maybe in desperate need of money and really feels he needs to attend that California fundraiser, but again at the expense of Ukraine, which the White House says that the American people had to shell out hundreds of billions of dollars for, is really quite astounding. Now, this was a real peace conference, it would be more discouraging. I also think this is going to be a problem for the narrative that the US and Ukraine were trying to push with this summit, which was basically, look how bad China is, they won't come, they won't pressure Russia, blah 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 blah. So with Biden not attending, it really takes all the pressure off of Xi to but even potentially go to this summit, or really any other non-Western world leader. So again, I find this all to be very interesting. I'm not sure it maybe signals a deeper rift between Biden and Zelensky. It's hard to imagine that the U.S. would really be that upset with Zelensky at a time they were greenlighting Ukraine to use American weapons to attack Russian territory. It seems like a far better message to send Ukraine would have been not giving them that green light. But again, this is just wild, and it really shows how just awful Biden's foreign policy is. I mean, to not attend this summit after everything that we've done for Ukraine is really wild to me. So, all right, let's move over to the Asia Pacific. China condemns U.S. deployment of previously banned missile systems to the Philippines. So the Chinese Defense Ministry on Thursday strongly condemned the U.S. deployment of an intermediate range missile system to the Philippines during military drills that were conducted in April and the first half of May. During Washington and Manila's annual Bilkatan exercises, the U.S. deployed Typhoon launchers, a covert system concealed in a 40-foot shipping container that fires Tomahawk and SM-6 missiles. The Typhoon system would have been banned under the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty, a treaty between the U.S. and Russia that was scrapped in 2019. It prohibited land-based missile systems with a range between 310 and 3,400 miles. I think that was 550 kilometers and 5,500 kilometers, which is generally speaking the range of intercontinental ballistic missiles or short-range ballistic missiles. But this would largely ban intermediate range missiles and cruise missiles. So this was really important to kind of taking Europe off a potential nuclear battlefield at the end of the Cold War, and really disappointed that Trump got out of this treaty, and just shows some of the failures of his presidency. But instead of returning to that, Biden ran on this return to a world diplomatic norm, right? That we're not going to have Trump's reckless foreign policy anymore. We're going to have something more normal. We're returning to the Iran nuclear deal, and you assume that Biden would also at least not be provocative on these issues, but he has been. So Tomahawk missiles can hit targets up to 1,150 miles away, making any land-based variant banned under the INF. The SM-6 missiles have a range of 290 miles, and U.S. officials say they could be effective against Chinese ships. U.S. officials previously told the New York Times that the purpose of developing and deploying the Typhoon launcher is to prepare for war with China, whether over Taiwan or in the South China Sea. The Chinese Defense Ministry spokesman Q Wan said that the deployment of Typhoon systems increased the risk of conflict. The United States and Philippines practices put the entire region under fire of the United States and brought huge risk of war into the region, Wu said, adding intermediate range missiles and strategic and offensive weapons with a strong Cold War color. And so it's important to note that during the Cold War, the Tomahawk did have a variant that the U.S. Apparently no longer uses that could fire nuclear tipped Tomahawk missiles. So that's significant. And one other thing I think is significant here, and it really hasn't come up yet, but I wonder if Russia is ever going to get nervous about the U.S. deploying these to Europe, or could they already be in Europe from the Russian perspective, since this is really just a 40-foot long shipping container and it has the missiles tucked inside. So, I think eventually the Kremlin is going to sound some warnings over these systems as well. All right, next up is an article I wrote for the Institute on June 3rd. South Korea ends military agreement with North Korea after tit-for-tat balloon quarrel. So Seoul says it is scrapping a 2018 military agreement with Pyongyang after North Korea floated hundreds of trash-filled balloons into South Korea. Pyongyang says the trash was a response to a years-long South Korean campaign that sent balloons aimed at undermining the government of Kim Jong-un in North Korea. So Kim Yo-jong, the sister of Supreme Leader Kim, issued a statement last week that said the North Koreans had placed toilet paper and waste into balloons and floated them into South Korea. Seoul reported hundreds of balloons entering South Korea, and some contained manure. Kim asserted that the North Korean balloons were sent in a response to the balloons that South Korea floats across the border with information aimed at fomenting dissent against Pyongyang. A lot of these flash drives just contain like sometimes there's rice, sometimes there's information that is like, oh, Kim's a bad guy and stuff like that, and other times it's more cultural, like they'll send K-pop and Korean dramas or Korean soap operas, whatever they're called, over into North Korea. And so North Korea want this to stop, and Kim Yo-jong in her statement implied that this was, constructed by the North Korean people, not necessarily the North Korean government, in a response to what South Korea was doing. I'm guessing that's not the case. I'm guessing that North Koreans probably don't love the North Korean balloons floating over. There are reports that the South Korean culture is widely banned in North Korea, and you could be punished for having South Korean things in North Korea, K-pop, stuff like that. And so, maybe the North Korean people see it as a risk. It doesn't really seem to have done anything to really undermine Kim whatsoever. It's just an ongoing provocation between the two sides. And so, this is the statement from Kim Yo-jong, according to KCNA, that's North Korean state media. Now, the trashy Koreans are brazenly claiming that their leaflet distribution against us is freedom of expression, and that our actions that correspond to them are clear violations of international law. Are freedom of expression and international law regulated depending on the direction in which the balloon flies? She asked. So, again, I think from the North Korean side, this was really just to get South Korea to stop saying the balloons. And North Korea, Pyongyang, said it would stop sending the balloons if Seoul cut out the practice as well. I believe South Korea has agreed to cut out the practice. South Korea responded to the balloon quarrel by fully terminating a 2018 military pact that limited the activity along the Korean border. Last year, Seoul partially walked back its commitments from the agreement after Pyongyang successfully launched a spy satellite into space. U.S. President Joe Biden and South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol have taken a hardline stance towards North Korea. The policy has resulted in hundreds of North Korean missile tests, the elimination of de-escalation agreements, the remilitarization of the Korean border, and the reduction in communications between Washington, Seoul, and Pyongyang. So just clear across the board failure. All right, some stories on the situation in Gaza here. Netanyahu says Biden's ceasefire proposal is incomplete. This from Dave DeCamp, June 3rd, antiwar.com. Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday said the Gaza ceasefire proposal presented by President Joe Biden was, quote, incomplete, and denied that the idea that Israel agreed to pursue a ceasefire. So the Times of Israel reported Netanyahu telling a group of Israeli lawmakers as saying, the claim that we agreed to a ceasefire without our conditions being met is incorrect. The proposal that Biden presented is incomplete. Netanyahu again reaffirmed that he wouldn't agree to a permanent ceasefire until it achieves its goals, including the destruction of Hamas's military and governing capabilities. Biden said the proposal he unveiled would lead to a permanent truce and Israeli withdrawal. Biden framed the potential deal as an Israeli proposal, but Netanyahu said there were gaps between the Israeli version and what Biden presented. According to Israel's Channel 12, Netanyahu said Israel could agree to a 6-week ceasefire for hostages to be released, but wouldn't end military operations in Gaza permanently. Over in Washington, the White House is still claiming the ceasefire deal was an Israeli proposal, despite Netanyahu's rejection of it. So John Kirby, the White House National Security Council spokesperson, said, as for the gaps, I don't know what gaps you're referring to. We're confident that accurately reflects the Israeli proposal, a proposal that we worked with the Israelis on, so I know of no gaps to speak of, Kirby added. Hamas released a statement saying the Palestinian group viewed Biden's proposal on Friday positively. A senior U.S. official told Haaretz that the proposal was nearly identical to one Hamas accepted from Egypt a few weeks ago, which Israel rejected. And so we also have this story here. This one, again, Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com. Report Israeli officials think Netanyahu's remarks could sabotage ceasefire deal. So Israeli officials are worried that recent comments from Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu could sabotage the chances of a Gaza ceasefire proposal put forward by President Biden. The Israeli official said there was constructive ambiguity in the proposal that could allow Israel and Hamas to enter the first phase of the deal, which involves a 6-week truce and initial hostage and prisoner exchange, without Israel committing to a permanent ceasefire. A permanent ceasefire and Israeli withdrawal from Gaza has been Hamas's main demand for a hostage deal. But since Biden outlined the potential agreement, Netanyahu and his close aides have said that Israel would not agree to a permanent ceasefire until it achieves its goals, which includes destroying Hamas's capabilities. Under the potential deal, the two sides would negotiate the terms for a permanent ceasefire during the first phase. A senior Israeli official told Axios that Netanyahu was killing the ambiguity by ruling out a permanent truce. Instead of keeping things ambiguous, his statements are pushing Hamas to ask for more clarification, making it harder to get a deal, a second Israeli official said. The official added that it appeared Netanyahu was trying to placate ministers Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, who are threatening to resign and bring down the coalition government if the cabinet agrees to the deal. Netanyahu also released his own reasons for not wanting to pause the genocidal war. Amid increasing international pressure, it would be hard for him to restart military operations in Gaza after a 6-week ceasefire, and with no war, there would be more domestic pressure on him to resign. So overall, you have this extremely wild and deceptive propaganda campaign going on in the U.S., where the entire U.S. government right now is out blaming Hamas for not accepting this deal, which Hamas is saying that, hey, this is, pretty close to what we want, so we're looking at this positively and we're ready to, sit down and start talking about it. And the Israeli position is, no, this isn't for us. We didn't propose this. The leader of the Israeli government is openly rejecting this deal, right? And so the Biden administration is telling the American people that the problem right now we have is that Hamas won't accept the Israeli proposal when it's not an Israeli proposal. Hamas is somewhat willing to sign on to it. They've agreed to a very similar proposal in the past and viewed this one positively. And the leader of the Israeli government is currently saying that we want nothing to do with it. So I think that really says it all. All right. So as the ceasefire is, being talked about and kicked around, and the Israelis are saying no to it, and the Biden administration is blaming Hamas, I think the point of this is the Biden administration wants to tell the American people that all of this is Hamas's fault. If Hamas would just accept a deal, these children would stop dying. Everything is bad Hamas, right? So this comes as Gaza media office says 3,500 Palestinian children at risk of starving to death. So Gaza's government media office released a statement on Monday that said over 3,500 Palestinian children under the age of 5 are at risk of starving to death in Gaza due to the Israeli siege. The media office said the children are suffering from acute malnutrition affecting their bodies, exposing them to infectious disease, hindering their growth, and threatening their survival. The statement said that the children were at risk of dying due to a severe shortage of milk and food, a lack of nutritional supplements, and the denial of vaccinations. The media office pointed to the fact that the Rafah border crossing has been closed since May 7th, and barely any aid has entered Gaza since then. On Saturday, the Palestinian news agency WAFA reported that a 13-year-old boy died due to malnutrition. A 13-year-old Palestinian child has died due to starvation in the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Deir al-Bala in the center of the Gaza Strip amidst the closure of the Rafah border crossing, the report said. WAFA added that so far at least 37 Palestinians have died of malnutrition and dehydration due to the Israeli restrictions on aid, although it's unclear if every starvation death has been recorded. Gaza's health ministry last death toll update said at least 36,479 Palestinians have been killed by the Israeli operation since October 7th. The U.S. continues to arm Israel and support the slaughter and starvation of Palestinians, despite U.S. laws that prohibit military aid to countries that block humanitarian assistance. The State Department claimed in a report that Israel was not blocking aid, allowing the shipments to continue to flow. However, a State Department official resigned over the report and called its conclusions false. All right. This is a story on, Israel as it relates to the U.S. here from Brett Wilkins, originally at Common Dreams, reprinted at antiwar.com. The new McCarthyism, New York hospital fires nurse for empathizing with Gaza mothers. So a nurse was fired earlier this month from a New York City hospital for a speech lamenting anguish felt by Palestinian mothers whose children were being killed during the Gaza genocide, remarks that came as she was being honored for providing exemplary care to mothers who have lost babies. So this was at NYU's Langone Hospital. Labor and delivery nurse Hassan Jabbar, who is a Palestinian American, was terminated over her May 7th speech while accepting an award, in which she said that it pains me to see the women of my country going through unimaginable losses themselves during the current genocide in Gaza. Even though I can't hold their hands and comfort them as they grieve their unborn children and the children they have lost during this genocide, I hope to make them proud as I represent them here at NYU. In a May 27th Instagram post, Jabbar recounted what she says happened to her when she went back to work for the first time after her speech. As soon as I walked into the unit, I was dragged into an impromptu meeting with the president and vice president of nursing at NYU Langone to discuss how I put others at risk and ruined the ceremony and offended people because of a small part of my speech was a tribute to the grieving mothers in my country. I was sent back to work my shift while the hospital spent the day figuring out what to do with me. After working almost the entire shift, I was dragged once again to an office where I was read my termination letter by the Director of Human Resources, Austin Bender, and escorted off the premises by a plainclothes police officer. NYU spokesperson Steve Reita told the New York Times that Jabbar was terminated over the speech and a previous incident related to Gaza, over which she was warned not to bring her views on diverse and charged issues into the workplace. She instead chose not to heed what a recent employee recognition event that was widely attended by her colleagues, some of who are upset by her comments. As a result, Jabbar is no longer at NYU Langone employee. So pretty disgusting. When somebody gets an award, I think they deserve a little bit of a chance to talk and say what they want to say. And it seemed like an appropriate place for her to say that, and pretty disgusting that they fired her for it. All right, a little bit of good news here. Dave DeCamp doesn't usually write that, but here's one. Iran's acting foreign minister confirms holding Oman broker talks with the U.S. So Iran's acting foreign minister, that's Ali Bagheri Khani, confirmed on Friday that Tehran has been holding Oman brokered talks with the U.S. amid soaring tensions in the Middle East. Axios reported last month that a senior U.S. official held indirect negotiations with Iran in Oman about how to avoid escalations in the region. The talks involved Brett McGurk, President Biden's top Middle East official on the National Security Council. Khani was asked about the reports during a trip to Lebanon and said, "We have always continued our negotiations. They have never stopped. The risk of regional escalations is still high as Israel has again ramped up its airstrikes in Syria. Israeli warplanes pounded targets in Aleppo early Monday morning. An Iran semi-official student news network reported that the Iranian military advisor was killed in an attack, according to Reuters. Israel's April 1st bombing of an Iranian consulate in Damascus, which killed senior Iranian Quds Force general, provoked the first ever Iranian drone and missile attack on Israeli territory. Iran choreographed its move, giving 72-hour notice to regional countries, making it clear it didn't want the situation to escalate further, and the Israeli response was muted. Khani's visit to Lebanon marks his first foreign trip as acting foreign minister since he replaced Hassan Amir Abdollahian, who died in a helicopter crash alongside Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi on May 19th. All right, couple stories on Lebanon here from Jason Ditz. Israeli drone strike kills 2 in southern Lebanon. So Israel continued its attack against motorcycles in southern Lebanon this morning, targeting 1. In this attack, 1 person was killed and another was wounded. Exactly who the casualties were not disclosed. And this sounds like the U.S. policy for Afghanistan under President Trump, where you could just attack anyone who's on a motorcycle because, people on motorcycles are probably militants. All right, another one here from Jason Ditz. Israel kills 2 shepherds, wounds 16 children in strikes across Lebanon. So Israeli forces dramatically escalated strikes against Lebanon over the weekend, claiming to have hit 40 military targets over the past 72 hours. Despite the claim, civilians appear to have been overwhelmingly borne the brunt of the strikes. On Saturday, strikes hit villages ranged across the southern border. Israel attacked the villages of Siddiqeen, located near the city of Tyre, and wounded some 16 children between the ages of 4 and 14. The National News Agency also reported attacks on several other villages, in which at least 7 additional people were wounded on Saturday. Israel did not comment on these strikes. On Sunday, Israeli forces attacked a home in southern Lebanon village, killing 2 brothers who were working as shepherds. Locals say the men used to sell sheep's milk to neighboring villages in the area. So, it's absolutely horrible. Fortunately, this hasn't escalated to the point of a major war yet, but we could be getting there. All right, next up here, and this is actually our last story on today's show. U.S. and U.K. launch round of heavy airstrikes on Yemen. So the U.S. and U.K. have launched multiple airstrikes on Yemen, the first time the 2 countries launched joint heavy bombings on the country in over 3 months. Yemeni media reported that 5 airstrikes hit Yemen's Red Sea province of Hodeidah, and that a radio building was hit in one of the strikes. At least 16 people were killed and 35 wounded. A communications network in the neighboring Taiz province was also reported to be targeted. Now, hitting anything in Taiz could create some problems on the ground, I guess, mainly for the Houthis, but could generally reunite fighting. This is a city that there's been fighting around, and I think it is essentially split and has been for 8-9 years now. So the U.S. is hitting targets around that city. Do the pro-Saudi forces, I think that's who's in that city, tried to launch an assault against the Houthi forces? Things like that could really pop up. So that's part of the danger of what the U.S. is doing here. U.S. Central Command says its forces, alongside UK armed forces, conducted strikes against 13 Houthi targets in Houthi-controlled Yemen, which is where most Yemenis live. CENTCOM said that it conducted unilateral strikes that it claimed destroyed 8 Houthi drones in Yemen and over the Red Sea. The British Defense Ministry said its forces participated in joint operations with U.S. forces against Houthi military facilities to degrade their ability to persist with attacks on international shipping in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The bombing marks the 5th time that the U.S. and U.K. launched joint airstrikes on Yemen since January. The U.S. has also launched hundreds of unilateral strikes, which have done nothing to deter Houthi attacks on shipping that began in response to the Israeli onslaught in Gaza. The latest round of U.S.-UK strikes came after the Houthis struck a ship in the Red Sea and said they downed a U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone for the 6th time since November 2023. The Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah, have made clear they will not stop their attacks until there is a ceasefire in Gaza and a lifting of the Israeli siege. The U.S. backed a brutal Saudi UAE war against the Houthis from 2015 till 2022 that involved heavy airstrikes and a blockade, and the Houthis only became more capable of fighting during that time. The war killed at least 377,000 people, with more than half dying from starvation and disease caused by the siege. A ceasefire between the Houthis and Saudis held relatively well since April of 2022, but the new U.S. sanctions are now blocking the implementation of a lasting peace deal. And the last thing I will add here is, after this, the Houthis claim to have hit a U.S. aircraft carrier, the USS Eisenhower, in the, I guess, Red Sea, Gulf of Aden area. And I guess initially I thought that claim was false, and now looking at some reports on the activity of that ship, I think it is potentially true. So this is something I'm going to keep an eye on. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show. More later in the week.